Well, hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Enhanced Application Visibility and Control with your Secure Web Gateway. Thank you for joining us. Before we get to the presentation, I just want to cover a few quick things. If at any time you want to ask a question, simply click on the Ask a Question button on the bottom left of your screen. At the end of the presentation, we'll answer as many questions as time allows. Under the Attachments tab, you'll find collateral and useful links, and that'll include the slides from today's session. And at the end of the webinar, we'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate this webinar, provide us feedback, tell us what you like, what you didn't like, what you want to see in the future by clicking on the Rate This button. And finally, this webinar is being recorded. So you can access it at any time using the same link you used to connect to today's live session. Okay, and with that, time for some introductions. My name is Tim Murphy. I'm a network security product marketer from Symantec. It's a division of Broadcom, if you didn't know, and I will be your moderator for today. And with us on the screen, you'll see our presenter, Matt Willden. He is an intelligence service product manager at Symantec, once again, a division of Broadcom. And he'll be leading us through today's discussion. And hey, Matt, how are you?
Doing well, Tim. How are you doing?
Yeah, you're a well-dressed guy there. I love the shirt. Yeah. Where you got it?
Like mine's, right?
So, hey, Matt, why don't you kick it off? The floor is all yours. Let's go back, pull up the slides, and get rocking.
Thanks, Tim. So thanks for those introductions, Tim. While this is pulling up, it's always good to have a chance to present to everybody. So today's presentation, if you didn't catch the title or didn't catch the description, we're going to be talking about intelligence services and, more to the point, how you can increase your capability of handling applications and various situations on your secure web gateway. But to kick it off, and to kind of level set where we're coming from, this is really going to be talking about the various intelligence services that our platform offers inside SWG, and really throughout all of the Symantec and Broadcom integrations that we have. And there hasn't ever been a more, I guess, pertinent time, you could say, for having good intelligence. As we all know, we're going through a pandemic, and as we're starting to see light at the tunnel, we're still seeing that there's increased demand. As you can see on the screen here, various reports have seen up to a 60% increase in internet traffic from when the COVID crisis began. And, we can see that maybe that'll go down after we return to the new normal or whatever that is. But even after that, we have reports saying that HR leaders and various employees will likely enforce or allow work from home situations post-pandemic. And along with 74% of the CEOs really seeing the value of work from home situations, and they really think they'll have at least a significant or more significant or more remote work deployment going forward or permanently, right? So all this is to say that there's lots of new situations that corporations and enterprises have to deal with when you have such a large workforce working from home. One of which is the never-ending threat of web threats. There's obviously millions of new sites created every single day. In fact, 71% of all of the various host names are created in the last 24 hours. And while many are legitimate, there's always a never-ending supply of malactors that are trying to take advantage of corporations, employees, executives, whatever they can get their hands onto. And kind of moving on that same touch point, we know now that browsers are actively being targeted, trying to spread infections by simply visiting a site. Web browsers have multiple vulnerabilities, just dependent on how your enterprise is. You could be on an out-of-date browser. You could there's just so many interesting doors and various strains of detection-only biased approaches to affect, maybe only a Firefox browser or Internet Explorer. And so this is to say that while working from home, it's even harder to regulate what browsers are being used and the various types of attacks that are coming down. And then, of course, the kind of icing on the cake, you can't interact with the internet without at least downloading a few files, and that means advanced zero-day malware, that could take out your computer just from downloading it. And so the question comes up, if I'm going to be protected, I need to have a comprehensive fail-safe intelligence services to back up whatever my control stack is or my security stack. And that's really kind of what I want to start off with, because we know that there's more threats than ever. We know that the web is constantly getting more and more attacks, and apart from email traffic, web attacks is the second most, or if not competing with the most prevalent attack surface. In my opinion, and we've put a lot of research and attention into this, but we think that you need three factors to be effective in this scenario. The first is you need to have access to that full picture. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to have an intelligence service, they have to have an incredible, vast array of information to power it. But that information, as massive as it is, it needs to be granular. You need to have the bits and pieces to make up statistically significant data points. And the next thing is, once you have that really good information, you need to have lots of it. And that's something that just a few crawlers on the internet or a bespoke intelligence service isn't going to be able to offer. And the reality is that the ecosystem fuels your feature set. And what we'll be talking about today is how Symantec has one of the most comprehensive ecosystems on the planet, and that fuels one of the most comprehensive feature sets that you can deploy today. So kind of touch point on that first box, right? How do we see all the traffic? Well, the proxy SG, which is our main deployment, accompanied with WSS, are both proxy-based architectures. And if you're unfamiliar with that, it's quite a bit different than a general firewall type of deployment, in that the proxy actually intercepts the traffic. It's capable of seeing specific responses, intercepting the traffic in real time to make policy decision. And we can actually reassemble the communication files. We can review all the different response headers, all the minutia in real time, and then make a decision before it passes our gateway to do that. And what's best is that this all feeds back into our telemetry system, so that we have this feedback mechanism where we can get this data, we can correlate the data, aggregate it, and protect our customers. And it just builds on itself. It's a compounding effect, right? So when we say we want the full picture, this is what we mean. And there's not very many systems on the market that can capture the type of data we have and then use that to protect our customers. So the next thing that we really need is the scope of it. And it looks like my slides aren't going forward. Maybe they're just building out still. There we go. Sorry.
No problem. It's worth a repeat.
Yeah. One more chance. There we go. So with that in mind, the next piece that's really important is just the ecosystem, right? The ecosystem, I said, fuels the feature set. And that ecosystem is advanced, right? We have 175 million plus protected endpoints that our product sees traffic from. We have 80 million plus SWG users, 160 plus million email users. I believe we're up well over 15,000 enterprise customers. We have a consumer aspect as well through various partnerships. We protect over 80% of the Fortune 500. We process well over 10 billion. I think we might even be pushing close to 20 billion these days in daily processed requests, web requests. We block billions of threats. You get the point, right? All of this means that we see more traffic and unique traffic from key key people. We're seeing traffic from some of the largest organizations in the world. And that gives us a unique insight that a lot of other vendors don't have. And with that much data, you're able to correlate and empower those machine learning and AI systems to really be effective and fine-tuned at scale, which is why, you know, in that bullet point there, 80% of the Fortune 500 trust us to protect them because of that unique placement in the market. So finally, that third box, how do we fill it, right? Well, it's pretty straightforward. We have what I think is one of the most comprehensive feature sets on the market. We have risk levels, which I think is our bread and butter of how best-in-class threat protection. But of course, we have categories, which are the bread and butter of any content filter. And we have application visibility, which we'll be getting into in a bit. And we have GeoIP, and this is all delivered through a cloud-delivered intelligence services. So it's constantly up to date, updated, you know, several hundred times a day. And this means that you have all this granularity to take the control into your hands and make a comprehensive policy that's unique to your situation. The classic thing that you don't want to fall into is, you know, having a homogeneous security policy where yours is just the same as, you know, company B down the road. That's a shady actor's favorite thing, is because they can just take that default setting and exploit it. The other thing that I think is worth mentioning here is that, you know, of course, we have a very comprehensive data set and we have a lot of telemetry, but above all things, semantic values are the customer's privacy. So we don't ever take anything that would be personally identifiable information. It's only threat telemetry, such as malicious indicators, and those are all anonymized to protect our users, but still deliver that risk back. And I think in the world of that we live in today, there's so much data being passed around that's also something that you want to take concern of. How are we handling your data? So what I'd like to do now is take a few minutes to go through these various feature sets and explain to you why, you know, these set us apart. And you know, maybe you're not in the market for a new web filter. Maybe you've already chosen us. I hope that this would at least give you a good overview of maybe some bits and pieces that you're not taking advantage of, or maybe you've never heard before. And so with that, let's kind of start with categories. As you know, categories are the backbone of any web filtering solution. They have been for decades. In fact, I think anyone that didn't have one would probably be they'd be struggling to accomplish their goals, right? And that's because they're super easy to understand and apply, and ours is no different than that. It's fueled by the largest scope and most diverse telemetry sources, as we've discussed, and we tend to focus on those high value targets as customers, such as, you know, large financial services, banks, large enterprises, and government. And that means that our customers, and therefore our telemetry, comes in from anywhere. That gives us a unique ability to see really weird traffic that comes in and rate it. And it gives us the ability to be more granular and accurate as well. So instead of just having, oh, this is social media or this is a chat, we can actually have up to 4 different categories assigned to a URL. And more to the point is, you know, when we're categorizing a URL, we like to think of it as pruning a tree, right? If there's a leaf or a flower that's, you know, maybe not so great, you can kind of prune that off and improve the entire health of the tree. You don't have to cut off the tree at the root. And that's what this allows us to do, because we have the entire URL string. We're not a firewall. We can actually rate all the way down to the query string, which is extremely helpful for sites like Dropbox or Google Drive or, you know, YouTube, which have hundreds of millions of various subdomains and various query strings and file paths that are going to be completely unique from other ones. So we can give unique categorizations to multiple URLs that have the same FQDN. And that makes us extremely granular in how we apply our policy, and it also drives down false positives. But I would be remiss to say that categories are, you know, the end all be all, and that's really, if you've tuned into our last webinar on threat risk levels, we talked about that a lot. but I want to cover this again because I think there's a lot of category pitfalls that people don't realize. And in my experience, I see a lot of customers over leveraging categories for security, and we really want to avoid that. And that's where threat risk levels come in. And the first big pitfall I would say is categories don't communicate risk. In other words, people sometimes confuse a benign rating such as email or business economy as equating zero risk, but that's absolutely not true. In fact, if you refer back to that last webinar we did, we actually have an example of where you can see plenty of risk levels 8, 9, and 10 in a what you would call a benign category, right? The point is that URL content is a poor risk determinant. So how do you know what the actual risk of a URL is if you're only looking at content? The next big pitfall of categories is you're never going to be able to categorize everything. Depending on your region, your language, where you are in the world, and other various reasons, we're only going to be able to categorize up to 1% or 97 to 99% of the world's traffic. So how do you handle that uncategorized, which I think most people would realize have a high amount of risk in them, without overblocking? And so we really want to address that with risk levels, and that allows you to write really simplified policy to do that, such as if uncategorized with a risk level 6 or higher, you should block it, for example. And then the final thing is more operated towards research and SOCs, but it's typically categories aren't granular enough to answer security questions. Categories are static, they're easy to poison and spoof, and can be incredibly difficult to tune. So how do you get a more detailed insight to traffic patterns on your network? The answer is risk levels, right? And risk levels have been extremely successful for that. Kind of moving on to what exactly our risk level technology has. Well, they're determined by site metadata, such as the traffic data, what the return type is, how big the payload, hundreds of different tokens that we extract from the page, and they're not content specific. While content obviously plays a big deal of it, we have found that content is not a statistically significant determinant for risk. In fact, it's usually a variety of different things. But because we look at those variety of things, that gives us the unique ability to give you a risk, even if the site doesn't load, even if it doesn't resolve, we can give you a risk level. In fact, we can assign a risk score to every single website that you could ever come across, which is a huge advantage to people looking to get that defined policy. They're simple and actionable, so you don't have a huge scale. It's 1 to 10, 10 being solid proven maliciousness, 10 being, these are big names with a long history of good behavior. You're not going to, it's extremely unlikely that you'll be attacked from this kind of vector. And I think that the biggest thing here is that we also support real-time evaluation, just like our content categories. On the right here, you can see, I'm not going to get into it, but you can see a brief example of how this plays, risk levels play a significant part in blocking attacks before anybody really even knows what happens, right? And so here's an example of the Panda Banker campaign in Japan, right? Where what we often do is our threat researchers will, once a campaign is identified, we'll go back and we'll see how our processes and our systems handled it. And we can see here that when we went down the chain, we could see that the host site didn't have a rating. Doesn't matter, it wasn't hacked. And as the site went through the different refers, we can see that it was a web ad, risk level 2, not a big deal. Web ads generally aren't that bad. They obviously refer to other things, which referred to an uncategorized risk level 5 that we rated dynamically. But as you move closer and closer to the actual attack vector, we were rating it. And we rated this, in this instance, actually 15 days in the database before we even knew about the campaign going on. The point is that risk scores don't use a cat and mouse game of finding the specific hash or finding this specific pattern. They use statistical metadata and machine learning to get it before we even know about it, and to great effect. So moving on in the slides, the thing that powers really a lot of this is the dynamic real-time rater. And without going into too much detail because of time, this really has an amazing ability powered by its 3 different AI systems. We have a background process called RL calculator. It basically recalculates all the risk levels for everything in the database and as needed for every newly or changed item. We have a context engine that takes in all those various data points in the background that I've spoken about and kind of gives it a score. And then we have a voting system, which is a real-time calculation for everything that's not in the database. And there's very similar processes for how we do this in real time for content categories. The point is, in your intelligent service, you have to have a way to take in real-time attacks. And ours was one of the first to the market, and it remains one of the most effective in the market today. And then finally, we have something that's quite unique to the market as well, and that's geolocation. And geolocation is really interesting. It's one of those tools that you perhaps don't even know you have, but it provides you a really unique way to be exacting and possibly minimize risk and increase compliance on your network. Basically, wherever the IP eventually resolves to, we can return where that country or specific region is to your SWIG, and then you can manage your traffic flow or compliance or potential threats based on the regions that you deem appropriate, which is it can be used to great effect. And you can always use all of these features independently or in combination with each other to have an even more sophisticated policy. So getting into the heart of the presentation here, we've talked about all of the various things that hopefully you're familiar with, but something that doesn't get addressed enough, I think, is advanced intelligence and how you can solve your data security and compliance needs from your actual SWIG with technology you probably are already paying for, but don't even realize you have. And to kind of kick that conversation off, this is kind of similar to where we started, right? With working from home, we see that there's more risks and more people using crazy apps than ever. In fact, I was reading another report the other day in the New York Times that was talking. It had a whole bunch of telemetry of the various app usage during the pandemic, and one of the most interesting ones is that companies were seeing an increase in web-hosted app usage. So instead of going to an app on your phone, such as Facebook or Twitter, they were using their actual computer. It was coming through a web browser, which implies that these people are spending more time at work browsing these applications, which means they're probably on a corporate device, exposing you to risk, potential data loss. I'm sorry, this slide didn't build out very nicely. But what you can't see behind here is that there's a significant amount of possible data loss, which can lead to multiple problems and compliance issues. And we have a fairly sophisticated solution to solve that inside of SWIG. Man, these slides sure build out weird.
You gotta talk to your product marketer.
Yeah.
Hey, Matt, really quickly, SWIG is that, a lot of people use the term, but some are unfamiliar. Secure Web Gateway?
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot of acronyms used in here. So yeah, thanks. That's the Secure Web Gateway. And there's a few various products that Symantec offers that fall into the Secure Web Gateway product. You may know them as, the Advanced Secure Gateway, ASG, WSS, or Web Security Service, or Proxy SG. Or the Proxy Secure Gateway, right? So thanks for helping me steer clear of acronyms. Feel free to correct me if I do there again, Tim. And on that same note, the CloudSoc CASB stands for Cloud Access Security Broker, which is another one of Symantec's really powerful applications and software solutions and security solutions. And what we've actually been able to do is they're one of the market leaders for several years in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. And we've been able to integrate very tightly with them. So and above and beyond providing intelligence services, providing your categories, your risk levels, and your geolocation, we can now provide you with 30,000 plus cloud applications in our catalog. We can enforce various policy controls, and even maybe you could call it like a DLP light type functionality inside your very own SWIG, all without having to purchase a separate CASB solution. and we'll talk about the nuances and why you may want to purchase a full CASB later. But kind of getting to the point, rounding the conversation off of why we think we need or what makes a comprehensive application feature set is this next slide here. And we believe we built out one of the more comprehensive solutions in the market, especially for the secure web gateway. And so you can see here on the left, as we start, we kind of talk about generic policy, right? What can we quickly set up to cover as much ground as possible? And as we move to the right, we get more and more granular controls. So application groups can be used for all sorts of things. They can be almost analogous to content categories. And you have application visibility, which is identifying the specific apps and then blocking them. And then application attributes, which are, what are the specific meta properties of the application you're using. And then finally, the functionality. And I'll go into each one of these in depth here, and then give you a brief demo of what this could look like in practice. But the point is, you want to have as much comprehensive feature set to control applications as you can in whatever device you're using, especially where the secure web gateway is typically one of the main focal points and the first, your web filter is typically your first line of defense when it comes to these type of network controls. So kind of starting with application groups and going into what those look like. There's typically, a few hundred various application groups, and every app that we have in our catalog will belong at least to one application group. There are some instances where they can belong to more than one. For example, I think Reddit belongs to, some type of media reading, and then it also belongs to social media. And what these allow you to do is it allows you to simplify policy by creating generic application grouping, right? So maybe you don't want to specify what apps are on are allowed on your network. You just want to say, I'm going to block all social networking apps altogether. And then you can poke holes in that as you wish. And we'll show you an example of that later. And as I said, that sounds like it's, why not just use content categories, right? But they're inherently different, because URL content categories, the entire point of that feature set is to take every URL that we can find on the entire web, right, whether it be an app or not, and shoehorn it into a large bucket that we call a content category. Whereas an application group is it's application specific, meaning that it's not going to have, if we say email, it's not going to have every single email URL out in existence, but it's going to have, in our catalog of 35,000 apps, everyone that's email is going to belong into that, right? So it's a more narrow and granular control than a typical app or a typical content category. And like all the other features, you can use this in combination with our other feature sets to fit your needs. Kind of moving on, the bread and butter, I think, is probably the biggest defense against shadow IT, and that's the application visibility. And hopefully you've seen this in action on your own. It's been available for a number of years, but we've recently increased its power by pushing the CloudSock CASB into the portfolio as well, without you having to purchase the CASB feature set. As you can see here, you can generate some really powerful reports. You can quickly see what applications are on your network. You can block applications and see which ones are trying to be used on your network. And then you can twist and combine this with all the other ones. So you can say, I'll allow this specific app as long as it doesn't have any pornography on it, or vice versa. Kind of moving on to the more granular controls is application attributes. And this can be really powerful, right? One of the most commonly used ones is something that we call the business readiness rating, or BRR for short. This is commonly used in CloudSock CASB. If you have a CloudSock CASB, you're probably familiar with it. But basically, this is just a 1 to 100 scale of, 100 being this app is super ready for, prime time. It has all of the things that you would expect a high-fledged app to have to be used in an office or enterprise setting. And a 1 being, you should really think twice before allowing this app on your network, because there's probably a lot of things that it's not doing properly. But apart from that, you can do a whole bunch of other stuff. One of the things I'll show you is you can actually look at, does the SSL key type, is it greater or less than 256, right? There's I believe approximately 200 or more various attributes that you can have granular policy on. Some are true false, as you can see. Others are rich text or text. So you can write policy on all of that. And applications are going to have different levels of attribute support, but it's still comprehensive, and it's mostly across all of the 35,000 apps, which is really incredible if you think about that. And then kind of closing up this feature set is probably one of the more interesting ones. Is you can actually control once you've kind of gotten to the point of what apps you're going to allow and what apps you don't want to allow on your network, you can actually control how they're used. So if you think of the attributes as being the properties of a site, think of the operations being the functionality of a site. So you can control, like this, an example, whether or not you want to send an email or send or upload content in LinkedIn, or you can control login events or downloading or uploading media. There's approximately 20 plus unique functions, and this type of functionality is supported on over 180 applications inside our catalog, which means that you can create really unique application scenarios, such as block uploads, or are more specific, allow login to LinkedIn, right? So you can poke really granular holes in your policy to allow specific users without granting them to access or giving them keys to the castle, so to speak, which gives you a really unique ability to make your end users happy, but still achieve your compliance goals. Finally, kind of coming into some user scenarios of what could this look like in practice, right? The first one that we recently released and we've seen a lot of happy users from is, how can you control DO applications? And if you don't know what DO stands for, that's DNS over HTTPS, right? So while our proxies have various levels of support for intercepting and blocking and identifying DOH traffic, you might not be on the newest version, or for whatever reason it's not working for you, or you just haven't had time to figure out how to roll that out. Something quickly you can do is you can run a report and see what DNS applications are being run on your network, right? So you can see if people are using Cisco's DNS or Cloudflare DNS over HTTPS, and then subsequently block that if needed. And you can block that. And what happens on the proxy is it'll default down to the regular DNS traffic, which allows you to have visibility and protect your browsers again, or your users again. So a really, really impressive way to use applications to achieve compliance and gain control back in your network. And then kind of moving on to the final point and the demo here, I'll give Tim a few minutes to maybe address any questions or ask anything while I transition to sharing a demo. Tim, do you have anything?
All right. Well, yeah, we actually did get a few questions, and one of them was kind of interesting. Is how beneficial was threat risk for customers who saw SolarWinds related URL requests, who are using them in policy? And before I let you get to that, we do have a series of blogs on SolarWinds, so I'll encourage people after the webinar to go to our blog and check them out. They're pretty cool. I'll have
exactly
my coworkers post it in the announcements section.
Yep. And
any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's just been such an interesting kind of thing to watch. I mean, as devastating and terrible as that attack was, it was probably one of the most significant cyber attacks in recent history. It's going to be, we're going to learn a lot of things out of that. I think we do know up front that risk levels were extremely effective in blocking some of the command and control servers on the web, but we're continuing to look into that, and we'll continue to publish blogs to answer those type of questions. But yeah. Was there any other questions?
We have more questions coming through. Now let's get to the demo. I love demos.
Perfect.
Excited.
All right. With that, I'll share my screen here. providing the demo gods are generous to us today. All right, I think we're seeing it here.
Yep.
So to set the stage here, what I'd like to kind of frame our objective here in our very naive, contrived demo here is that we want to, we've been told that we want to block social media applications on our network, right? And so we're going to go through a series of events of creating policy and testing policy to see how the things that we just talked about in our application actually work in practice. So the first thing, of course, is most straightforward approach, right? We're going to take a giant slice at it and try and knock off as much work as we can. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a new layer and create a web access layer to start controlling our web access, and specifically application web access. And of course, we want to name it to make sure it looks good and it makes sense when you start building out your policy and you have, dozens and dozens of lines. You want to know what you're talking about. And then for the first rule, we're just going to, use application groups to block all social networks just out of the gate. And so you can see here, there's, 236 groups available right now. Of that, I chose social network, and then we can put that in policy and make sure that it's deny. And then you can see, look at that, it's blocked. And maybe we should test a couple other sites out. So let's test out maybe LinkedIn. Sure enough, it's blocked. And maybe for the last one, let's test out Twitter. Now look at that. Would you believe it? Just like that, we've probably increased the productivity of all of our employees by 5-fold, right? So logically, I think what's going to end up happening is there's probably going to be some legitimate uses that are going to be requested of us, right? We're going to get end user complaints, and maybe some people that need to access legitimate sites want to poke a hole in this, right? And they say enough's enough. We need to have a little bit more control, right? And so, your whoever's writing your security policy, maybe they've taken a really strict approach and they say, okay, we'll allow people to go to a social media site, but only if that site supports SSL key of greater than 256. So let's kind of see what that looks like. So we'll go back to the visual policy manager and we'll add a new rule. Is it playing? And in that rule, we'll create a new application attribute that specifically allows us to see if the SSL key strength is greater than 256. And if it is, we'll allow it. But if it's not, we'll deny it. So it'll be interesting to see what apps kind of work with this. So we gotta apply the policy. That's a critical error. Okay, so let's see if Facebook has. Yep, it looks like Facebook works. Let's see if LinkedIn supports an SSL key greater than 256. Nope. And finally, let's see if Twitter does. Nope. So it looks like out of all those, the only one that works is Facebook. So, that's great. Facebook works. That might be the more time-consuming one, but perhaps we want to take a stricter stance on what we're controlling, right? And someone comes in and they say they have a legitimate reason to use LinkedIn. And they say that's fine. We'll allow LinkedIn specifically. So let's create the policy to allow LinkedIn while denying all the other applications unless they have a significant key strength. So we'll come in here and we'll use the LinkedIn application name to specifically allow LinkedIn in policy. Make sure we apply the policy this time. You can see, yep, Facebook still works, and now LinkedIn should work, and Twitter still being denied, right? So that wide policy, that generic policy, is still helping protect us. So that's great. We've kind of granted users free reign to use LinkedIn as much as they want, but it comes back and it says, you know what, that's just too much risk for us. We don't want people being able to upload whatever they want and possibly uploading things that is against company policy or profane or what have you. And we don't want them, wasting time managing their profile or something in that respect. So let's create some policy using using application operations that will allow us to have the sanctioned application use, but restrict its functionality to make our lives a bit safer. So we'll come in here and we'll look at this operation, and maybe we'll make sure it has the right ones selected, and we'll make sure we update the name to reflect what we're actually trying to do so it's not confusing down the road. And let's remember to apply that policy. And then let's go see how that actually works in practice with LinkedIn. So you can see our fancy LinkedIn profile. And it's important because this guy that's trying to access it, he's pretty high up at the company he's at. So you want to make sure that he's not just wasting time posting weird things on LinkedIn. And so here we have just some generic screen grab we have, and we're going to see if we've indeed done it right. And so he'll try to post this, and you'll see that it gets denied out of the gate. Try as he might, right? So the point here is that we've kind of walked through this entire scenario of how we can write a generic policy at a very high level, and then continue to dial it in using application groups, and then application attributes, and then using an application name to allow a specific app. And then once we allow that specific app, we can then even restrict that functionality for some very practical things, right? In this case, we didn't allow them to post some weird image to the internet. And with that kind of concludes the demo. So I'll turn the time back over to Tim, and maybe we can have some time for some questions.
Yeah, definitely. Well, but first we get to all the other questions. I get to go first because I'm the moderator. And so can you give me an example of and this is something I've heard you describe before, of combining the features to create greater granularity, instead of saying, hey, this is one I want to choose versus this versus the other. How do somebody can theoretically use them all, multiple features together?
Yeah, so hopefully that demo kind of showed one way that you could do that. But the reality is all those features can be used interchangeably, right? So one that you could do that's very, very common, and this is from simple to most complicated, is let's take a category and let's restrict the risk level on that. So we don't want to just allow it's good enough to allow or block a certain category, but maybe that's too restrictive to your user base. So you can create a risk level that says, if it's risk level greater than this, then we'll block, but otherwise it doesn't pose any risk and there's not much bandwidth wastage there. And then on top of that, you can say, okay, we'll block this category, but there's specific applications inside this category group that we want to take care of, right? So you can take that subset of categories and you can take an application group and such as social networking and block those, right? Which would still allow all of the various categories or URLs that fall in the category that aren't specific applications, but block the applications themselves. And then kind of taking that one step further. So we've allowed the category, but we've restricted its use to only the non-risky ones. And then we've kind of prohibited the actual apps from being used, but maybe you can navigate to the URLs or to the information pages, right? And then we just saw that you could apply that live demo to saying, at that point, we can poke a hole into LinkedIn and maybe Facebook and we can allow them to log in, but not upload media. Or maybe they can go to file storage, but they can download something from code hosting, but they can't upload that kind of stuff. And so, and then, you can add geolocation on top of that. So really quickly, you see that those 5 or 6 different features really start to build on themselves to create really unique policy that could fit almost any situation a company might find themselves in.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
I got my question out of the way. Let's get to another one. In what scenario would secure web gateway, this is in the question box, you want to read this? So you choose how to answer it. In what scenario would secure web gateway be more beneficial over on-prem proxy when we need to control internet traffic from our servers, from the servers?
Sorry, could you repeat that question again? I'm still trying to.
In what scenario would a secure web gateway be more beneficial over an on-prem proxy when we need to control internet traffic from the servers?
Yeah, so the first thing that comes to mind is basically just, and let me repeat the question. So you're asking what's the difference between web security service between on-prem? I'm still having
I think you have a free reign to answer however you like.
My apologies there. Anyways, if I take the question right, which is what's the advantage of an on-prem SWIG versus maybe a cloud-only deployment? It's going to be the granularity of controls, right? The proxy SG is and remains one of the most comprehensive solutions to controlling the network on your on-prem business. Without a doubt. Of course, the web security service is powered by that same technology, but it's not going to have the same user and scale and advantages of having your own on-prem device, as well as those advanced controls in your main corporate office or your remotes. Hopefully, that answers the question if I understood it correctly.
Yeah, I think that we use the term secure web gateway, and we've heard SWIG, but really that can be an on-prem deployment, or it could be in the cloud as well. So I think that works. There's two questions that I'll combine them. I'll actually take the shorter version. What is the cost for this application?
That's a great
question. That wanted if it was an add-on, but I think they're
the
same thing.
It is an add-on. So it kind of we're constantly innovating here at Symantec, and you may or may not heard that we just released a new kind of what you would call a refresh to our SWIG, or specifically our proxy SG portfolio. And in that, it's actually included. You get it for free with the purchase of that proxy. And depending on the package level, there is two package levels. There's an advanced and a standard. And you can see how that's packaged in other material. But if you buy the proxy advanced, you get all this functionality included. And if you have the standard proxy with enterprise licensing, you're going to get that as well. And if you're a historical user of proxy SG or WSS, you get it out of the gate. So I think in most situations, you're probably already using it as an add-on without even realizing it. And there's probably quite a few tools, as you've seen today, that maybe you didn't even know you had that you do.
Really quickly, someone's wondering what's the difference between this and the CASB solution. There was a slide you mentioned it, but
yeah, great question, and thanks for bringing that back. So I think the biggest difference is that the CASB or CloudSoc or the DLP protection products in general are much more comprehensive, right? We're taking this approach from a SWIG point of view, or a secure web gateway point of view. And so there's functional things that a SWIG can do, and there's going to be limitations to what that deployment can do without a full deployment of CASB. The basic idea is that if you're looking to just start dipping your feet into, controlling the applications on your network and seeing what applications are there and getting some basic controls in place really quick with technology you own already, without having to increase your cost, that's the solution for you, is just to go with your SWIG. But if you've kind of gone down that path of shadow IT already, and you have a fairly sophisticated deployment and quite a few, you know what your compliance requirements are, and you already have a CASB, that's where that's going to shine. It's going to give you more detailed reports. It's going to give you more comprehensive controls, and everything else that comes with that CloudSoc. So it's really just how mature are you on your shadow IT story usage.
All right. Basically, what's the difference between URL content categories in the application group? May have been asked before the demo, but
yeah. So the big question there is, and I kind of tried to address this in the presentation, right? But the URL content categories are a bucket to capture as many URLs as possible that fit that content type, right? So, there's hundreds of millions of URLs that we'll have in our database or we rate in real time that will fall into one of these 88 plus categories. Whereas there's only 35,000 applications with their respective URLs that fall into application groups. So it's probably fair to say that application groups are a subset of categories, but their focus is on applications, not on content type, and not on URLs.
All right. Someone's asking, when will the application attributes and their relative value from CloudSock be proxy SG, ASG loggable fields?
I know that we're working on that. That's something that we've worked, and I've talked with the respective product managers specifically about. We're definitely trying to address that. So it's on the roadmap.
All right, okay, great. Now we got another one coming in. Hey, and anybody else has questions? We're getting near the end of the list here. So what about an app that does not contain a category database?
That's a great question. So typically this won't happen, right? Because we know the apps that are in our catalog. And so if we know the apps that are in the catalog, we can leverage that to also have a URL category. But your point's well taken, right? So what in the off chance that there is an app that for whatever reason doesn't make it to the application database or the URL content database, it'll work just the same. They're completely independent databases that function independently of each other. And if you want to request to add a specific app, of course, the best way is to work with your respective SE or reach out to the support channel you have to file an FR or go through those channels to submit that.
So buying a product manager at lunch doesn't cut it?
I'm always ready for lunch. No, I don't think so.
Okay.
But,
all right. Well, any other questions? We'll give you a couple seconds. Roll them in. Otherwise, we're going to start signing off here. All right. Well, we have gotten to the end of the list. And I'd like to say to everybody out there, thank you so much for joining us today. Before you sign off, as I mentioned before, take a moment and rate the webinar, download the material and the attachments. And we did get a question coming in.
Yeah, I can answer that question too.
You got it.
Yeah. So we're constantly expanding our integrations with web filtering. So to put it in perspective, I think I started on this team a few years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And I think at that time we had maybe a baker's dozen of various products that we integrated with, and now we're over 30, right? So we've more than doubled the integrations we have. Some of those are completely customer transparent, so maybe you don't even know that you're being protected by our product, and others are, you see the categories, you can see all the various switches there. I know that I've talked with a respective SSLV product manager on more than one occasion. We're actually looking at expanding this functionality, if possible, to include threat risk levels and actually applications as well. So we want to bring the same technology and put it on SSLV, put it on anything else that makes sense. So it's on the roadmap, but like all things, we have to prioritize them and find time. So it's coming.
Yep. And SSLV for people out there is our encrypted traffic management solution, all ports and protocols of traffic.
Yep.
Great. All right, so we got the last person to chime in and saying thank you for the presentation. And with that, I will say, Matt, thank you for the presentation as well. Thanks once again, everybody, download the attachments, rate us. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you so much.